The world is divided into different worldviews. In the Western world, we have the worldview of right and wrong. In the Eastern part of the world and the Middle East, we have the worldview of shame and honor. And in places like Africa, we have the worldview of power and fear, driven by this worldview. It was no less different in Jesus' time. When Jesus entered the scene, he rocked the disciples' boats. Excuse the pun. And he made quite a big splash. I'll be here all week.
As you heard the prayer of Moses, as you received the wilderness cry, you find pleasure in our boldness.
Welcome everyone to our next episode on relevance, where we're talking about the next parable in our series of Matthean parables, this one being the workers in the vineyard. And so I want to be focusing on this, specifically the cultural part of it. But of course, as we always do, in the end of the video, we'll be focusing more on what this actually means for us as Christians. So some common cultural themes include that this Mediterranean culture in which Jesus was living did not have this worldview of right and wrong, as we said in the West, or power and shame, as we said in Africa, but the worldview of honor and shame. This was definitely the focus in many of the parables that Jesus taught. And Jesus so publicly challenged this that it really was staggering for the people of that time. It caused a very big stir. Poverty was widespread, both in rural and urban areas of the time. And according to Friesen, biblical scholars tended to underestimate the overwhelming poverty that characterized the Roman Empire of the time. Therefore, he developed a kind of poverty scale that more accurately provides 7 categories for describing the economic resources, especially in the ancient city of Rome. And so I can walk you through this, not too long. We'll just take a brief look at it. So here you can see that there's different parts, different levels of these 7 categories on the poverty scale. And if you look down at the last few, it's interesting that they seem to be the largest. The stable near subsistence level with reasonable hope of remaining above the minimal level, the subsistence level and often below minimum level, number 6, and then the below subsistence level, all categorized at the last 3 parts of the scale. And if you count them together, they're 90% of people of that time. That's 9 out of 10 people who were struggling on a daily basis to make ends meet. Now, the denarius spoken of in this parable also, denarius a day was the pay of a Roman soldier in Tiberius' time. Now, a denarius a day was the pay of a Roman soldier in Tiberius of the time, a few years before this parable was even uttered, and even less for some peasants. And interestingly, in 33 AD, there was an apparent financial collapse of an extraordinary scale that caused even worse living conditions for people across the Mediterranean. I want to focus on the 3 points that this parable actually points out. The first one is that the kingdom of God is of grace, not of debt. And they who were called first and have labored the longest are by no means more important and have no more claim upon God than those who were called last, or more claim upon God's kingdom. The second one is that its primary application is to the apostles, right? This has been an answer almost to the question raised by Peter. Peter often revving his mouth while his brain stays in neutral. He mentioned, "We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" And so they were not to be of such a spirit as to imagine with the murmurers in Matthew 20:11 that they should have something supereminent, because they were called first and had labored the longest, above those who in their own time were to be afterwards called. All of the secondary applications are all to those to whom such a comparison of first and last called will apply, such as the Jews, who were the first nation to be called by God, and with a definite covenant, and afterwards then following would be the heathens, the goyim. An interesting reference to this is in Romans 11 verse 13. It says, "I am talking to you Gentiles," this is Paul speaking, "inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry, in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what then will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy." And then it goes on until verse 19, where it says, "You will say then," these are the Gentiles who will say, "branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. This is true, but They, Israel, part of Israel, were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. However, and this is a very big however, do not be arrogant, but tremble, for if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. All are equal under God. People who have only come to know Christ much later in life, they form the next category, versus those of us who've already known the Lord for quite some time and walked with him for quite some time. I remember once speaking to a friend of mine, and she, having met Jesus now recently, have had an amazing experience of God speaking to her and empowering her to reach out to other people who do not know him. And looking at her now, the growth that you've seen in her is to be celebrated, not to be looked down upon, not to be frowned upon because it's different than your own, or because there's still some water to tread and some journeys to walk through. But this is an exciting thing, the fact that heaven itself celebrates when a new believer comes into the kingdom. The various times of hiring are also not to be pressed as each having an exclusive meaning of worth, but they serve to spread the calling over the various periods of the world. And this to me is very interesting. It seems that it shows us again and again that there are various seasons for each person and for each believer throughout the history of Christianity. Why was Abraham Abraham? And Abraham wasn't Shana or some other believer of our time? Why wasn't it someone else? Why were we born in this time with its numerous complexities and its numerous difficulties? And I re-echo what Mordecai said in his wisdom to Esther. You were born for such a time as this. There is a divine purpose that you share with all other believers throughout all the ages, a cloud of witnesses, as Hebrews 12 says. What an exciting thought to think that we were called to live in such a time as this, not in the time of the patriarchs, not in the time of the Exodus or in the time of the judges, not in those times at all, but in this specific 21st century. What an exciting thought. And I want to leave you with this thought that you do have a purpose. The reason why you were born in this time is very specific. And I pray that God would reveal that to you. So this was a quick one. Thank you so much for joining me. We're really going to be excited to show you our next video, which will be a little bit different. I'll only be releasing this a while later, but our first interview will be coming up soon. Who will it be with, I wonder? Watch this space and join us for that one as well.